the first thing that I'm going to do here is, as I build up my project, I'm going to establish my scene. Questions come up about using actual scenes in Flash. So if I click here, I'll see that I am on scene 1. And it is possible that if I go under Window and go under Other Panels, I can choose Scene. And this gives me a particular window and I can access scenes here. There's a problem using scenes for this particular project, because when you use scenes, what they do is each scene will start over at frame 1 with its own timeline. But because this project is about doing an animation to a song, to a continuous audio feed, that audio will only show up in the first scene. Depending on your sync method for the audio, it might continue to play, but it's not going to show up in the other scenes, which would make it very hard to sync your animation to it. So I'm going to be discouraging you from using scenes on this particular project, but they are something that we can look at for future endeavors. So we can, in effect, using layers and folders, create quasi-scenes, and that gives us the ability to have a little bit more control over it. So as I look at my layers, I'm going to construct a scene here. And I'll create my first layer and I'll call that Sky. And then I'm going to have another layer and call this Ground. And I'm going to have another layer, and this layer will contain a house. So I have different layers. Now I'm going to pay attention to which layer is currently active. There, select my sky layer, and I'm going to create a sky. So I'm not too concerned about the color yet or the size. Now I've made this box bigger than my stage area. I do that intentionally so I don't end up accidentally having it so it's just a little bit off, and I might not realize it's 1 or 2 pixels off until I test my movie, and then later after I've lined everything up, I'm like, oh crap, things didn't line up, it's not where I wanted it. So I usually make things a little bit bigger. Now as I do this, I may decide that flat colors are just not working for me, and I want to introduce some type of a gradient into this color so that I can get a nice little gradation in my sky. So I can do that. I could look over at my swatches and see I could choose a gradient, but these gradients, as they come in, they default as radial gradients. So that doesn't really work very well for a sky where I'd want my color to kind of gradate from top to bottom, not from the center out. But if I pull up my color palette, I will see that I have an option of different kinds of gradients I can choose. So I could choose the linear gradient, and we can see it defaults to black and white as its colors. In my gradient, as I see it here, I have my starting color, which I could make kind of a bluish purple. And I can have my ending color, which I want to make more of a cyan. Now you may notice that the colors, as they're working their way across the screen here, aren't really lining up top to bottom, but they're going side to side. In some programs, when you're setting up your gradient, you have an option of choosing the angle for the gradient right here in the palette, like Illustrator, and that would be nice. I wish I could. But alas, it's not there. Even as I've been wishing for that feature since, I can't even think what version of Flash, and it's still not there. But under my transform tool, if I click and hold down, I will see there's also a gradient transform tool. Remember, any of your tools that have the little diamond in the corner or triangle in the corner, that indicates there are additional tools under that particular tool. So I can choose my gradient transform tool, and with that, if I click on my gradient, I will see that in this corner I can rotate my gradient, and I can then compress or extend that gradient so I can, in effect, control where that gradient is flowing on my artwork. So we do have, and if I wanted it to be at an angle and not to be, so I could do that, so it diagonally goes across. So I do have the ability to modify the gradient and put it in as I need it. Now, an important point to consider when you're using gradients, if you fill every object with gradients because you're like, ooh, they're pretty, what you're going to find is they take significantly more processing power, CPU power, to render on screen. So if you have 100 objects dancing and singing and playing around, creating a beautiful display of artistry, but they're all filled with gradients, you may find that your animation starts to chug and has issues staying in sync with your audio, just because the CPU is going to then struggle to render all of those gradients in each frame of your animation. So that is a point to keep in mind, that I would encourage you to use gradients where it makes sense, but don't go completely nuts and off the deep end and fill everything with a gradient, because the playback performance of your project is going to suffer possibly significantly. So that is just a small point to keep in mind. So I've created my sky. I'm going to lock my sky layer. Now I'm going to create some ground here, and I need to then select my ground layer, and I will choose a base starting color for this. Now I've put in my ground. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Pre-transform that. I want to make it even bigger, because eventually my intention with this ground is to animate this across my stage to simulate the effect of a camera panning movement, where I'm moving the ground from side to side. So when it's a solid color, we won't see a whole lot of change with it, but if I add other things to it, then we can start to see a little bit more. And I'm going to then add another layer here, and that will be my shrubs. Now I'm locking the ground layer, and I'm going to then go and find decent color. And I can add in some shrubs. Now, once I've made a few of these, if I'm feeling a little bit lazy, I could then select a shrub. And if I hold down the Option key, it will make a copy. And I can move it around on the screen. So if I hold down Option and drag, I can then make copies. So that's when you're feeling lazy and you want to fill things in. Now I could even take these shrubs and I could fill them, some of them with slightly different colors, so they're not all the same. And a nice part about doing that is I'm going to then possibly see a little bit more effect with the animation, because then everything isn't the same color. And if I decide the swatches aren't enough for me and I do need to choose an individual color, I can click on the little circle in the corner. Again, so click here, click the circle, and then I can tweak my color a little bit this way, which gives me just a very easy, basic change. To be able to figure out where the stage is, there are two options that you can use. One option is you can pull up the rulers and you can drag out some guides, and you can use those. that works okay. It's not my favorite way of doing it. My preferred way of doing it is to actually create a guide layer. The guide layer is the layer that has artwork or notes on it that allow me to see something, but then when I don't want it to show up in the finished product, I just set it as a guide, and then it won't publish with the SWF. It stays there as a reference tool, allowing me to see what I need to see, but it doesn't publish. So I am going to add a layer. I'm going to name this layer Guide. And now with this layer as my guide, I typically use red as my color for it. So I have a red stroke, no fill, and I'm just going to draw a rectangle. Now you may notice this rectangle is not the size of my stage. It's not even on the stage, it's out in the perimeter. And that's okay, because I find what's easiest to get this to be absolutely correctly sized is to draw it just quickly and easily. Double click on it so it's selected, it's now highlighted, and then modify it numerically in the property panel. So I think this is a holdover from my Illustrator days. I don't trust my eyes, I trust numbers. That when I work in Illustrator, everything is always positioned and aligned and laid out according to numbers. I don't base it on, does it look close? It's the numbers. So here, it's the numbers. So I want it to start out at 0, 0, which is the top left-hand corner of the stage. So I'll say right up here, 0. And now I can just tab through and hit 0 again. Now it's moved it over. And I know that the width of my current project is 550 pixels wide. And I know that its height is 400. Once I've done that, it now puts that box on screen exactly where my stage is. I can click off and see I have that very nice little border. Two things should happen. One, I should lock it. And two, I need to make this guide layer become a guide. Before I lock it, I'm just going to demonstrate that it truly is a guide. This is a guide. There. So if I test my movie, we'll see that the red shows up. Okay, red's there. But if I don't want that red to show up, if I double click on the little icon for the layer, not its name, double clicking its name allows me to rename it, but double clicking on its icon allows me to change the properties of that layer. And I can set this layer up as a guide layer. So I have different options here, and guide is the one I want to use. Having done that, it changes its icon. It looks like a T-square. So that's Flash's indicator that this is a guide layer, not an artwork layer. And now if I test my movie, we'll see that it does not publish with the SWF. But the guide layer is here as a guide for me. So I can now see that it's there. Oh, need to unlock it. Get rid of the crap I didn't need. Okay. Double click on the icon in the layer to convert it to a guide. And if you want a guide layer to not become a guide layer anymore, you double click on its icon and say normal. Now sometimes accidentally students have converted layers to guide layers and then they can't figure out why the artwork on that layer doesn't publish in their SWF file. They're like, where'd my character go? Where's my tree? Where's my... And they accidentally have converted it to a guide layer. You can also get to it by right-clicking on it, and you can select guide or not guide to the layer as well. So that's an additional way you can do it. If you're one of those right-clickers in the group, you can use that as an option. So the only thing I have left right now is I need to create my little house that I want to put on here, my little house on the prairie, or some silly little animation that I'm working on here. So I'll just quickly build a house, and the house is going to be got some basic structure. Just go add some now it can't be the same color on both walls. They have to be different. So as I'm working, I'm being very careful here to make sure that only my house layer is unlocked. Now I'm going to convert that house that I've drawn into a symbol. So I can hit F8 and convert this into a symbol. Because if I intend to animate this or move it across the screen, it makes sense to convert it to a symbol so that I can use motion tweening, so I'm not limited just to kind of redrawing it on each frame, because that would really suck. So now I'm going to position that house over here, lock my house layer, and my shrubs and ground probably should be combined into one so I can animate it as a single group. So I'm going to just select all of those, and that will end up pulling the artwork from one layer onto the other. But I really would like to maintain these layers because I don't want the shrubs to merge into this green. So sometimes you've created artwork, but you want to convert that artwork into a symbol, maintaining the layers. And the way that you can do that is you can highlight the frames here. So I highlight the frames just by clicking and dragging on them, highlights those frames. If I right click on them, I will have an option to cut or copy the frames. Doesn't really matter too much because we'll delete what was there anyway, so I'm just going to say cut frames for now. That gets rid of the artwork on those frames. Now instead of choosing modify convert to symbol, I'm going to choose modify new symbol. Call it background. And if I go to this first frame, choose paste frames, not only did it paste in the artwork, it remembered the layers and their names, which is kind of nice. So if you do a bunch of artwork and you're like, oh shoot, I wanted these layers to be in a symbol, highlight the frames, and the frames can, you can even have a whole tween animation, multiple layers, multiple keyframes, all of that can be highlighted. Cut it, insert new symbol, and then right click on frame 1 and paste, and it puts it in. I'm just going to move it over. That just makes me happy. If you do more work with the tool, then you will understand that one. So now that I've done that, if I look at my library, I will see there's my background. I can just drag it out and position it. I'm just making sure it's extending below the red line a little bit. Let's see. My door is not really at proper perspective. My horizon line should be more about, actually I can fix that by unlocking the house and pulling the house down a little bit. And there, now my house is following slightly more accurate perspective. Alright, so I'll just start with it off screen here. So I have my background, I have my house. I can animate these different things as I see fit. I should probably save, since I haven't saved for a little while. To do the fade in from black, what I'm going to need, I am going to need a black box. So I need a big black box. So if I go grab my rectangle tool, and I'm going to add a new layer. I'm going to call this layer Fade. And on that layer, I'm going to draw myself a rectangle. Now this particular rectangle, since I want to fade from black, I should probably fill it with black. Technically, I could always change it later, but it's just as easy to make it black now. To turn this into an object that I can use to control my fade, I need to convert it to a symbol. So F8, fade box, now it's a symbol. Now, if I did not use this box to control my fade, I could actually take each one of these objects that I have here. Well, I'd have to convert the sky to a movie clip as well. And then I could turn them all black. And then I could slowly fade them from black back. But that means I would have to do my sky, I would have to do the ground, I would have to do the house. And if I had more objects, say I had 10 layers of stuff, that'd be 10 layers I would have to animate all fading in from black. I would rather just put kind of a cover over it and have that cover fade out, leaving behind the artwork when it's done. To me, that makes more sense. So we can look at doing it both ways. But if I take this object here, and notice I didn't pay attention to the size. I could have tried to line it up at 0, 0 and made it full size. But again, I prefer to use my numbers. X, Y, width 550, height 400. Okay, now it's over the top. Create motion tween. Now when I'm doing fades, what I'm doing is changing a color effect. The color effect I'm doing is alpha, and the change I want to go to is about 10%. Now I could go all the way down to 0, so it's totally gone, but the problem with that is I can't see that there's something there. So if we look at it here, well, okay, I'll undo that in a little bit. I can't see anything is there. But if I go 10%, we can see that there's just a hint of something there. And the reason I like to do that is by going to that point, I can now see on stage that there is artwork, not just looking in the timeline here. So it's a little bit easier to track, because the difference between that and now if I go here, the difference when it's animating between 10% opacity and 0 is usually the step of about 1 frame. I mean, the visual impact of it is once we hit 10, the next step really is just be done, go away. So it works out okay to fade to 10, but then you can see that your artwork is there. Now let's just keep on doing, line back up. And that 10 isn't hard and fast, that it has to be exactly 10, you just kind of get it. And now we can see that my box fades to reveal the white. Now if my sky continues on, and my house, and my background, so I'm just clicking out here in these layers, and then I can hit F5. So we'll see, we get this nice little fade up. Starts black, fades up over the span of 1 second. The default length of a tween when you add it is 1 second of animation, which is why it went 24 frames. If I want this to be longer, I stretch it out. If it's too slow, of course, I pull it up tighter. Now if I test my movie, we'll see it fades up over the space of 1 second. There's nothing else going on, so it doesn't look that impressive yet. If the house were sitting on screen, I could see it fades up to reveal the house. So it's a nice, cheap little trick. Now, if I want it to stay black for a little while, say I want to put in some title credits or something else like that. So say I want to do that, then I'm going to want to maybe add a new layer. Oh, cancel, missed. If you're wondering what that little icon showed up with the motion guide and stuff like that, we will be looking at that this morning, so hold your questions on that little point. So I'm going to call this title. Now I'll create some text. My rocking awesome movie. Now you may notice that the text I created is black. I don't want to use black. I'm going to choose, I'm in a pink mood today, so it's pink. You can go put the pink on screen. You can see it's a little bit small, so I need to make it bigger. Apparently there's a typo in it, that when you can't see what you're typing because it's too small, it's easy to make typos. And I'll just go with rock and awesome. And now I'm missing a letter there. Awesome movie. There we go. And as always, I hate times, so I will choose a different font. So I think Comic Sans is ranking really high today because that is, the font. Comic Sans or Papyrus are, just two fonts that are really making me happy, but I'm going to refrain from using those on this occasion, and I will choose Cooper Black because it's got nice thick shapes. Now it's not good kind of layout of going all the way to the edges, so I either need to make it smaller or break it onto two lines, so I can make it a little bit smaller. If you open up paragraph and say center with it, then when I make it smaller it stays centered if you had it filling the screen, so that can be a way so you don't shrink it, move it, and things like that. So if you want things to be centered, you can put them on screen. Okay, so now I have my title here. And I want to, now I could put a fade over this and adjust it with the fade and things like that, or I can turn this into a symbol. So I'm going to turn this into a symbol and say title. And I am going to right click on it and say motion tween. And now at this point, what I can do is I can take this text and I can modify its alpha down to 10%. I can fade it up. And if you're wondering, it's like, whoa, well, now it's fading up over that. That's okay, because we'll do some adjustments here. Go up. Stay up for a little bit. Now I want a keyframe to occur here, so I can use the same command we used when I was doing frame-by-frame animation of F6 to insert a keyframe. So it automatically inserts it so it fades up, stays bright, and now I'm going to take my text and fade it down to 10%. Good enough. All right, so there's my title. Now with that occurring, I really want my fade to stay there and stay black until the title fades out, and then I want the black to fade out. So I want to stage these things a little bit more. And for that matter, I could move these layers over. There we go. I'll just drag and highlight and decide that those layers don't start until that. So now I need to adjust. Ooh, that's actually kind of fun. It's kind of fun with the Gives it a little pop, but I don't want to do my title on white, so we'll leave it. At this point, I have a keyframe here. If I hold down the Option key, I can drag, and you see there's a little plus next to it. That indicates it's cloning or duplicating that. So now I have a second keyframe here for my artwork, for the fade, and that's what I care about. And the fade's at 100%. And now I can just move. Well, you always want to keep your hand close to undo because it happens that you need to undo regularly. I want to move this one keyframe. If I hold down the Command key, I can select it, and then I can move it to here. So we'll notice it stays black, comes up, fades out, and now the black fades out. So I'm staging my animation. So I'm both adjusting the title object and then adjusting the fade object, and now we have our scene. But there's nothing to say that I can't actually have the camera moving as that scene comes up, because I want my house and ground here. Let's go lock the other objects. Start with the house over here. Whoop. Start with the house there. Select the house and ground, and I can just move them on stage. And now save, test my movie, title, fades out, fade up, and then I need more time for it to stay there, but we can certainly work with that. So if I want to use the same fade layer here, lock my other layers, and I want to fade this scene out to black and want it to start fading to black about here, if I click and hit F7 to insert an empty keyframe in to continue, then I'm going to watch my other tween extend out. A couple options. I could have this fade be continuous through the whole thing. I mean, I could certainly, at this point, have faded it down to 0. So I click on my box. I double-clicked accidentally, which brought me into my symbol editing mode. That's why it grayed out everything around it. Now I see the black as it is black, and I see I'm inside the symbol. I'm not at my main timeline. So always pay attention to if suddenly your surroundings change. You're like, ooh, layers are gone, colors look different. Look up at the top and see where you are. Chances are you dumped yourself into the symbol and you're not at the root level anymore. So I could now take my box, pull it down to 0 so it is in fact at 0. I could click here, hit F6, my box is still at 0. And I could click here and hit F6, click in the box, once not twice, and bring it up to 100. Now my scene fades back. So that's one solution that I could do. The other possibility figure out where I am here. The other possibility is if I hit F7, so that does indeed end at that point. Go here, hit F6, and then I can just put the fade box out, modify its properties. And it's here. Hit F6. Turn on motion tweening again. Now hit F6. Go back to its starting frame. Alpha. 10. Go to the end. It's at 100. So some people will enjoy seeing that when the fade shouldn't be on screen, it's gone, versus having it just tween down to 0 but always there. So you will like having empty space. And others of you will prefer to keep it simpler and just keep adding in those keyframes for it. It really does become personal preference as much as anything else. Every person who animates develops different stylistic ways of putting the pieces together. If you are working on your project and you choose an awesome rocking font to mimic my movie title, and you want to keep that font with your project, there are kind of two methods. One is foolproof and the other not so much. If I create my finished Swift file, the published file, if I create that on the machine with the font, it will be embedded in that Swift, so this text will be part of that project, period. But that font is not part of my authoring file, my FLA file. So one option available to me is, oh, it's locked. That's why I can't choose it. There you go. I don't know what that weirdness was that I just saw, but here we are. We're back to normal. So when I look at this font, if I want to make this font part of my FLA file, I can embed. Now this also then, this embedding actually causes the text to get packaged with it, so that if down the road when you're doing interactive Flash where you have dynamic text fields where its contents are changing based on activities within the project or user input, if you want to have those font characters appear, then you can put that in. And I have an option of putting in everything, like everything. Or I could decide that, well, all I need is, say, my uppercase letters, or if I need uppercase, lowercase. If I know I don't need numbers and punctuations, I don't have to select those. And then I can hit OK. If I look at my library, we'll see there's that font, and I should have named it instead of leaving it font 1. That method sometimes does not fully work. So the other method that can work is you can make this, once you know that it is exactly the letters you want, the size you want, all your type is done and you just want to kind of render it out, what you do is you, with it selected, you go under Modify and you choose Break Apart. The first instance breaks it into individual text fields. The second time you choose Break Apart, it now turns it into shapes the same as if you had taken those shapes and painted them with the paintbrush. So doing that guarantees. Now these are not a font, these aren't text anymore. They're shapes. They're pink shapes. They're shapes in the shape of the letters that I originally used. So when I go back to here now, I can go to any computer, Mac, Windows, and my text will look just like this. The disadvantage of this is that if I decide that I want to change a word, I can't do it. So there's pros and cons to each method. This one guarantees that what I see here will publish 100% of the time on every computer. Disadvantage is that I can't change it. The other method of embedding the font into my library is that it doesn't always seem to take. And I don't have a great answer for you as to the why on that. So I made a layer here. It's called bird. I've inserted a keyframe at the very end. I don't really care that it's at the very end because I'll extend my other layers out so then the bird can fly in over that scene. Then we'll zoom in on it, fade to black, and call it a wrap for the day. So now I need to make my bird and so I have a basic bird shape. I'm not going to be concerned with creating all the fills and coloring it in and all of that, but I do want to make a little bit of animation with my bird because it's just not that fun if he's not moving his wings. So highlight, convert to symbol. Okay. Now I am going to double click on the bird, so I'm now in my symbol editing mode. So it's not scene 1, it's scene 1 bird, so I'm inside the bird symbol. And turn on my onion skinning. I can hit F7, back to my paintbrush. Now, one thing that will happen with this animation is that it's going to go very quickly at the moment. So what I'll need to do is stretch some of these frames out. But we can see I have a little bit of bird motion here. And with this, I'm using the comma and period key to advance between the frames, especially when I'll have a few frames of animation. I find that's easier than trying to grab the playback head and do my little scrubbing. But we can see if I did this, turn on looping, turn off onion skinning, and play. Okay, so it's going really too fast. If I want to extend this out, I can take each frame and hit F5, so each frame now is 2 frames long. And for his wings to get back up, I can cheat if I'm being lazy. So I can select these 2 frames, drag, hold down Option. See the little plus indicating it's going to clone them or copy them. So now we've created so we can see the bird is starting to flap his wings. If all of these were nicely closed, cleaned up shapes, I could use the paint bucket and fill it. If I decide that I just want to add a little bit of fill color so I can see the difference between the bird and the sky beneath, I'm going to then fill this. Just choose a little bigger brush so it goes faster. And because I'm on a layer beneath, my original lines show. And I may actually like this style of artwork because it just gives it a little kind of a hand-colored, a hand-sketched sort of appearance. So it's kind of fun that way. All right, so it's still going to be a pretty fast flying bird. I really could stand to have a few more frames, but in the interest of getting the demo moving, I'm going to say that's good enough for that. Now, if I want my bird to fly in on screen, I'm first going to animate the bird, and then I'll worry about the background elements. Create motion tween for the bird, remembering that the bird's keyframe started after everything else. You can stretch that out. We see, okay, there it is for the bird. Go to the end of my time. Bird can fly over, and yeah, not that exciting. Now, if we remember from last week, I can say that I want this bird to behave as a graphic symbol, and then I can start to see it flap its way across the stage. So now I have a bird. Well, I didn't want to watch the whole thing, but now my bird flaps its way across the stage, but I really don't like it flying in a straight line. With the move tool or selection tool, I can, of course, I could adjust this path and change that direction that the bird is flying so that it flies in an arcing path if I want. Now, something else I can do, if we look at this, with this particular path, there's an option called Orient to Path. So we can see now the bird is following that. But what would work better, before I orient the bird to that path, is to, well, I'm going to make the path more dramatic so it's easier to see what's going on. If I take the bird and transform it so it's already following the direction of the path, so its rotation is pointing in the direction of the path. Now, click on the tween, not the bird. Click on the tween, either on stage or in the timeline, and choose Orient to Path. And we'll see that now the bird is following the path, and I didn't have to manually do it. That's nice. So now we have a bird that's diving into the ground here. And then the next part of my animation should be a big dust cloud explosion of feathers flying up, and it would be a lot of fun. Get a little squawking sound effect, squawk and a whoomp as it hits the ground, and build up a nice animation. But let's say I want to follow a freeform path. There is a cool thing that you can do in Flash. Now, I can't draw on this layer. If I click and try to draw on my bird layer, it tells me the current selection in layer bird is a tween span which does not support drawing. Oh, too bad. So I'll say OK. Now I'm using the pencil tool, not the brush tool, because I want to create a path, a Bezier path, like I could draw with the pen tool, but the pencil tool is more freeform. And I'm going to modify so I am using a smooth line, not a straight line, so it gives me a more flowing kind of line. Now I'm just going to add a temporary junk layer. So I added a new layer. And because I did use my keyboard shortcuts and customize those, I could have Command-Shift-N and added that in. And now I'm going to draw with the pencil tool. As long as my line doesn't cross, I'm going to be able to see this animation follow this path The moment the line crosses, Flash will be left wondering, what direction do I go when those two lines intersect? Because that gives me three other possibilities. Because if I have two lines, if I'm moving on one, do I go left, right, down? Yeah. Which way do I go? It won't know. So it's important to get a little snag right there that I'm not really fond of. Let's see if I can get rid of one of those anchor points here. Nope. I don't want to get rid of a segment. Oh, sorry. Now here, I change my keyboard shortcuts and then forget that I changed them. So I'm zooming way in so I can see the points, if I can remember where that one went. There it is. And we'll rejoin those. All right, that makes for a little cleaner segment. It might hiccup down here, but I'll hope I don't have to worry about it. So here I have a path. I drew it with the pencil tool. I could use the pen tool as well, but I used the pencil tool. And as I said, this is a junk layer, so I'll double click this, cut it, and now this is where the fun comes in. Now, this is approximately a little over a second long. That big swirling path, it would probably be hard for the bird to cover that distance in that, so I need to make this a little bit longer. So let's make that tween a little bit longer. Otherwise Flash will freak out and say, there's not enough frames to animate that. I'll be like, yeah, that's fine.
You're just clicking and pulling that.
I'm just clicking and stretching this out. When I see my cursor show up with the two lines on it like that with arrowheads, that means I can make this longer or shorter. Now, I drew a pencil path. I cut it. I think I used Command C or Command X, but I could have also choose cut up here. Now if I click on my tween, so the tween is selected, not the bird, the tween, either on the stage or in the timeline here, and then paste. And if I go up here, it's not this paste. I have to click here, and I can't right-click and get to it. I use the keyboard shortcut of paste. And now if I look, I'll see that the bird is on this path, and apparently it starts in the middle and is working its way out. I'm not quite sure why it decided to go in that direction, but if I reverse my keyframes, now the bird starts at the outside. Notice the bird isn't following the angle of the path. But if I wanted the bird to, orient to path, okay, it really does start to look like a drunk bird now. And it's kind of fun. But I think for this illusion, before I orient the bird to the path, I am going to go to the very end of this animation, and I'm going to transform my bird. And make the birdie get smaller. Now orient to path. You'll see the bird. I think the bird's going down the toilet, but it's kind of fun. Yeah. The bird has an inner ear problem. Okay. All right. So the bird's animating. Now I want my sky, ground, and house to all exist. So the bird is going to just adjust and fly the bird into the window. My guide layer, I want to make sure I'm still on screen, so let's go extend out my guide. We can see there is my guide layer. So yeah, so the bird flew into the window. Poor guy. Vertigo problem. It was sad. Now if I want to zoom in on my whole scene, I could now take on this layer, F6, this layer, F6. If we assume the bird's gone, or just make that, I think, safe assumption. Now I can hit F6 here, extend the sky out, F5, and now I can unlock my, I'll just lock everything else that I know I don't need. Select my house, select my ground, pre-transform. That gives me access to the scale. Scale it up, move. So now we're scaling up on the house. Let's see, where is my fade? So I have the fade here. See, that's fading as we're all quickly fading here. If I make a copy of it, so now I just have a basic, that was, let's see, was that a fade to black? That's going to be exactly what I need here at the very end. We're going to fade and zoom at the same time. Ready for the next scene. And if I want this to extend out for, say, a second of blackness, I can just hit F5. That extends it out. And now if I watch my movie, it's it there, but it'll be more fun just to watch it as a finished SWF. Pan, continue panning, fade out, drunk bird comes in, craters in the window, fade to black. All that's missing now is the music. And then I will have a completed project.